welcome back to another episode of Meet La Prensa. Viewer, if you like what you see here, if you're finding value, please like and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. And to those of you who are already subscribed, thank you. You are the heroes. Tonight, we have another Shiro joining us from the news business on Meet La Prensa. Now, as you know, people who have been watching Meet La Prensa, we've been interviewing a lot of Latinas in the news business. And some of the things that Latinas go through in the news business are just atrocious. It's deplorable the way that we as an industry treat the Latinas who give it their all, who deliver every day, and yet somehow continue to get destroyed time and time again. Now, in the broader American economy, Latinas are among the least paid demographic anywhere. They make like 55 cents on the dollar to what white men make. And in the news business, the disrespect that they're putting up with right now, and that they've been putting up with for years, is appalling. It needs to be called out. And we here at Meet La Prensa are firmly committed to doing just that. So let's run through who we've talked to so far, what we talked about. First of all, Mariana Atencio, when she was at MSNBC as a correspondent, was told not to look too Latina when she came down here to Washington for the White House Correspondents' Dinner. Stephanie Mendez, a producer out in San Francisco, she tells us that Univision San Francisco, right, colluded with the employee union out there to leverage her DACA status to dismiss her, that her immigration status, Univision, and the employee union worked together to dismiss her using her DACA status, using her immigration status against her. That's just disgusting. Now, the third story that we've been digging in on is actually a trilogy, and it's a trilogy that has a degree of hope to it, right? Now, Lori Lizarraga wrote an essay that kicked off what can only be described at this point as a firestorm of commentary. This essay, the day it dropped, was shared in every journalism chat in America, and it alleges that a station out in Denver called 9 News, a television station out in Denver, Colorado, called 9 News, which is owned by a company called TEGNA, unfairly discriminated against and dismissed 3 Latina superstars, right? Now, this essay is the mantelpiece now in a complaint before the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC. And it's a complaint that doesn't just talk about 9 News. It talks about TEGNA on the whole. And in this complaint, you have blackface being used by people who work there. You have people telling Asian-American journalists that they need to westernize their eyes with makeup. And like I'm saying, the mantelpiece item in this complaint so far, because from what I understand, it's an ongoing investigation, the mantelpiece item in this complaint so far is Lori's essay. Now, Lori talks about her situation and how she got run out of 9 News. And she also talks about 2 of her colleagues. Sonia Gutierrez, who's been on our show, she was told that she had to call, according to Sonia's story, she was told that she had to call out her own immigration status on air if she was going to cover immigration. And if she wasn't willing to do that, Sonia tells us that she had to give her sources, as a journalist, she had to give her sources in the immigrant community to non-immigrant community, including white guys in some cases. So the third person mentioned in Lori Lizarraga's essay, and it is an honor to have you here tonight, Kristen Aguirre, coming to us from Asheville, North Carolina. Welcome to Meet La Prensa.
Thank you. I'm Kristen, so excited to be here.
Kristen, it is an honor to have you on our air. Our air is your air, not just now, but for the rest of your career. If you ever need somebody to have your back, if you ever want to stand up, this is what we're here for. Now, Kristen, you had a medical issue, right, while you were at 9 News Denver, right? And yes. How are you feeling now? What happened? How are you feeling right now?
Sure. I feel amazing. When I think about how I feel now, I would have killed to feel the way I am now back then when I was in the hospital. So in April 2019, I suffered an ischemic stroke. I took a nap and basically woke up to an entirely different life. The entire left side of my body was paralyzed. And then I spent 3 months in the hospital rehabbing to regain basically the use of my entire left side, which meant like relearning how to walk, how to cut my food, tie my shoes, like anything we learned as a child is basically what I had to relearn as a 31-year-old woman.
Wow. And when you had this stroke, it sounds to me like from the reporting in Westward that, the newsroom was like, we got your back, Kristen. Is that roughly true?
Yes. I mean, the only thing I do want to clarify is I would have very close relationships with a lot of colleagues at Nine News, and they were all with me in the ER, in the ICU. And I feel indebted to them forever because they were supporting me the entire way, always visiting me, cheering me on, sending me text messages, phone calls. You can do it. We're behind you. So it's not, I don't have an issue with my team members. I had an issue with management at Nine
Hmm.
News because my team was there with me every step of the way. My best friends that I love very dearly set up a stroke. There was a stroke walk happening. They all had T-shirts made for me. So yeah, they were behind me, and of course they asked, "Can we do stories?" And I had jumped on. I said, "Yeah," because if my story can help one person, then I feel okay about it. So I was totally fine with sharing my story and going to the hospital and getting really into like the deep vulnerable details of my recovery. And so the station did that, and in doing that they really showed like, hey, we're behind Kristen. We love her. We want her to come back. But then the issue really started when I was attempting to come back to come on air. And that's when a lot of problems for me happened. And they kind of showed their true colors, management, I would say. Again, not my teammates, but management.
And that distinction, I think, is really important because when you read the SEC complaint, it is a complaint about management.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot less colleague to colleague. It's a complaint about management. And I too, I think, have been guilty of generalizing a little bit that Nine News is the problem. And to
Right.
anybody at Nine News who took that the wrong way, I just want to say I apologize for that generalization because what we really are talking about here, it sounds like, is a management problem. So you had your stroke, you went through your recovery, you come back to Nine News, ready to work, I assume. And
Yes.
what happened?
But I was still healing, I was only about what 3 or 4 months out of having a brain injury. So I started to come back. We started doing these little trial runs when I would practice anchoring a show, and right off the bat they knew my alliteration or my voice was a little off, they suggested, and it was, right? I hadn't done it in almost a year, and I was recovering from a stroke. And I did not, again, the impact of my stroke was purely physical. I didn't have any cognitive or speech deficits, so that wasn't an issue. I could speak fine, but for them, they thought that my inflection was off, and that's something that they really, really focused on. Like, well, you don't sound the same. Of course I don't. I had a stroke, but
Right.
they really harped in on that, and that's primarily one of the reasons they suggested I could no longer do my job. And they really had me believing that I did sound so different that I couldn't do my job. So I ended up doing practice shows, but of course it wasn't good enough for them. And then I thought, okay, well, maybe we'll just put anchoring on the back burner for now, even though I had worked 10 years in the business to get this anchor job. Okay, let's put it on the back burner now, focus just solely on reporting. So then I would go out on these practice stories, and they would say, hey, you need to have 3 stories done by next Thursday. So I would have them done, set it up. I would go out with a photographer, but then we would have these meetings where it was me and 3 other managers where we would go over my work, and they just would constantly rip it to shreds. Like, I didn't do this good enough. This wasn't good enough. XYZ, you name it. And I have never had my work scrutinized like that. Even when I was healthy in my entire decade of being in news, I've never had my work ripped to shreds. So why now? That's a little fishy, right? It's just because they wanted me out, and then they got it.
So it sounds to me like when we talk to Lori and Sonia, it sounds to me like a clear-cut case of discrimination against
Mhm.
Latinas who want to cover immigration. It sounds like in your case, the nuance is more a discrimination case against a disability. Is that
Sure. No,
okay?
I do think mine is does it I've been asked this before, like, do I think being Latina has anything to do with it? It certainly didn't help. Like, I think women of color in business are already coming forth with strikes against us. One, you're a minority, you're a female, and if you're vocal, they can't control you. And so if they can't control you, they think you're a liability. So I was all of those things. And then I had a disability, which I think for them was just too much. Like, that's enough. Bye. Yeah, we've already put our money into you. We've showed us that we've supported you, but now you're asking too much. And so then they just said, see ya, and fired me.
So you were delivering, they were telling you, listen, like we
Hmm.
want stories, 3 stories by Thursday or whatever, and you were delivering, and all of a sudden they're playing tiki taka with like, the details that maybe they weren't before your stroke. Is it like
Yes.
what? Okay.
So
Like if
Nine News is a was a tough newsroom, right? It was looked at as one of the best in the nation, and so it was definitely a tough newsroom. And I mean, before I was sick, I never had issues. I had glowing reviews, and so I knew what it was going to take to get back into the newsroom, and I was ready. I mean, I was still healing, but I was ready to do that. But yeah, they just kind of didn't care that I was still healing. They had given me enough time, I think, in their eyes, and they were like, okay, that's enough. And then at one of the last meetings I had with them, the news director, Tim Ryan, had said, you know what, at some point we can't do these exercises anymore. And that's when I knew, like, they're going to fire me. And I had told them that they, like, all of the way they were treating me in these meetings was really giving me anxiety. And he had suggested I talk to HR, but I mean, anybody in that building knows HR there is useless.
And what was, I would love to get into HR, but real quick, like what was Tim Giant Ryan's responsibility to you as news director?
I don't even know if that's really his title because TEGNA has a lot of made up titles, but it's like director of content or some nonsense like that. So
But he's
he,
management.
he's management. Yes, he's one of the leaders in the newsroom. So I never knew Tim before. I never worked with him before I got sick. They went through, like, I think it was 3 news directors when I was in the hospital for 3 months, and so when I came out, I had never worked with him. I met him once when I came in for my interview to get initially hired in 2017, but then he left and I never saw him again. So he really didn't know anything about my work, what I brought to the table, what kind of journalist I was. And so for me, I think this was an easy way to get one person out so he could bring whoever he wants in, right? And a younger Latina who's cheaper probably and could mold more, right? Because I'm already a grown ass woman. Like, I don't have time for whatever nonsense he was going to tell me. And I think he knew that.
Right. So what, I mean, you're delivering, what were your expectations as someone returning to Nine News after you were sick? What did they need to do better? What could, like, if we could go back in a crystal ball or whatever, right? What
Mhm.
could they have done better? Like what would have been your expectations returning from recover while you're healing? You're delivering the stories they're asking you to do. From what you're saying, like, they just wanted to move you on so that some new guy could build a base of allies, sort of like a tale as
Right,
old
right, right.
as time in the news business. But
Right.
what could they have done different? What should they have done different to make sure that you
Well,
were set up for success and that their audience was getting the stories from clearly talented news professionals like you, right?
well, they
um
did have me work under the director of reporting, which I thought was helping me, but clearly they didn't think so. I mean, I don't know, change their frame of mind. Like, I think that we were working, I thought things were kind of going well until I would get into those meetings and they were just brutal. And I can take a good beating, right? I mean, I'm on TV. I get trolled
right.
every day. I have always been open to criticism to be better even now. And I just think that I don't know, they what could they have done better? I think being more patient, like, I don't know, they were touting to the community that they were behind me being patient, but in reality in those meetings they were not.
So how does that feel? Because to me, if I mean, again, not to put myself in your shoes, because I've obviously
Okay.
never been in this situation, but to me, it seems like if they're using you as a publicity stunt to show inter-newsroom solidarity to the audience, like we have one of
Mhm.
our own is going through this and we are behind her 100%. And then you come and, when that happens, it's one news director and one set of management. And by the time you
Mhm.
return, there have been some turnover and stuff like that, right? And new people and their priorities are starting to play out, you know? Like, how did that make you feel? Like, did you feel like you were being used as a prop? Did you feel discriminated against? Like, how did that make you feel?
I felt very betrayed by, I guess, the assistant news director, MJ, who I was friends with, and she would text me regularly in the hospital, like, I'll do anything to get you back. And then it came down to it, and she would just sit in those meetings and just let them rip me apart and just sit there and not say anything. Like, hey, or I had said, I had asked, like, my work has never been scrutinized like this. Like, what's the deal? And I think she said something along the lines of, well, I don't know any other way to do it. So you take someone's work into a room and just tell them they suck the entire time, like, that has left a lasting impression on my mental health. And to me, which is why I really wanted to share my story, because if I could help one person maybe struggling like this, who has had some sort of impact on them because with that is a lasting impression of their mental health because of the way they've been treated by the management there. Like, I just want you to know you're not alone. This happened to the three of us. Like Sonia, Lori, and I talk often about the impact that the newsroom has left on our mental health.
Wow. So MJ basically was somebody who, you know, when it's easy one-on-one in the text messages that nobody can see, said she
Mm-hmm.
had your back. But when it mattered in the meeting was when you were getting piled up on,
Mm-hmm.
MJ cowered in the corner. Is that basically what you're saying? Like,
Kind of like, I wish she would have been like, whoa, 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 like, Tim, you don't know what she's capable of. She's a good journalist. I watched her these last 3 years really grow. We've moved her to Nightside because we were proud of her work and we wanted her perspective on that show. So we moved her. I know what she's capable of. We maybe need to be a little bit more patient and let's work together. I mean, even if they were like, hey, Kristen, like, let's sit down. We think that maybe you need a little more time to heal before coming back, I probably would have been a little receptive to that instead of just being like, hey, this is not working out, you're fired, see ya. And
so
essentially ending my career. If I was weaker, I would have just continued to leave the news business and listen to them.
right. So basically, a question I got to ask, when it comes to the management at Nine News after you returned, and Tim's ganging up on you, and MJ's not standing up for you, who do they answer to? Ultimately, where does the buck stop at Nine News? Like, if you had to go over Tim's head all the way to the top, right? And did you ever go over Tim's head to express your grievances? And if so, like, who ultimately is responsible for the behavior of who is responsible for the managing the management that is created in your story, this toxic environment for Latinas and disabled
Mhm.
people?
I really don't know. To go over their heads, I wouldn't even know. I would never go to HR there. That would be just stupid. And
And why
then, I
not?
mean, well, I mean, everyone in the building who has had some sort of issue where they've had to go to HR, nothing gets done. I think the HR there perpetuates that toxic environment. They're there to protect management, not to protect employees.
And
And I mean, that showed even in my case. Um, so there was what really, really bothered me, and I talk about it all the time in some of these interviews, was my family and I really use this mantra of, listen, you did the hard work. You had to learn to walk again. You can learn to walk again. Everything else is cake. You can do anything else. And I've said that multiple times. Like my initial meeting with Tim Ryan, for my first time when I was coming back and I met him, I told him, like, yeah, I'm going to be rusty. This is going to be hard. But for me, I learned to walk again. I can learn to talk, to read the news again. And he initially laughed and was like, yeah. And then during a phone call with my agent, he had mentioned, like, I know she thinks because she almost like mocking, like, I know she thinks because she walked again, she can do this, but we don't know or whatever. And then when I was getting fired, Jessica Hobbs mentioned to me, listen, I know you think because you can walk again, you can anchor again, but this is different. And I was just so just tired and exhausted at that point that there was a little spark in me that's like, ooh, I wanted to say something, but I was just like, just get me the hell out of here. And I was just like, okay, bye. Um,
So was HR in-house at Nine News, or was it
yeah,
a corporate HR that was attached to TEGNA, like as a national HR? Or how did HR
no,
work?
there's a in-house HR, and I believe she has some high rank within Tegna as well. She's like head of HR or something. I don't know the exact title, but I know she's not just HR in the building for Nine News. It's for like she's a larger role in the company.
And you did not feel supported by her.
No, I mean, she came
And
into my meetings, but I always knew that in the back of my head that she's not there for employees. She's there to protect management, and that's ultimately what she did.
so HR was in editorial meetings, is that right?
No, I'm sorry. So
Oh,
I had some
okay.
meetings with my therapist whose job at the time was to get me back to full-time work. So we had meetings with HR, and then MJ was in them to kind of talk about, okay, how are we going to get Kristen back to work? And so they were supportive in those meetings, but then privately, were monsters to me.
You mentioned in Instagram that there was a moment when you knew that the hammer was going to fall. What was that moment, and what led to that realization?
So, um, there were a couple moments. So the first initial one was my original news director, Linda. She was news director when I had my stroke, was at the hospital with me, was very much a mentor to me. So I knew as long as I had Linda in my corner that I really could focus on healing and getting back, in time to who I was before. And then when she got fired, I knew I was sitting in my hospital bed and I got the text message and I just knew like, well, there it goes for you. Like it's not happening. Like without Linda, advocating for me and pushing for me because she knew what kind of journalist I was and my capabilities and the woman that I am and how I could come back. Like I knew without her advocating for me, there was no chance. And it was right. I was completely right.
So, what is the outcome that you seek by coming forward with your story? Like, what would you, I mean? Obviously, you and Sonia and Lori have had this incredible impact on the discussion. There have been changes, and I guess the style guide for Nine News or maybe TEGNA about the use of certain language and stuff like that, dealing with immigration. What is like in a perfect world where you get to write the script for the future of that newsroom and broader, just the culture of newsrooms in this country. What is it that you seek through your advocacy on behalf of Latinas, women like you, who do feel these many pressures closing in on them in their newsrooms today, like right now?
I hope that newsroom looks more like the community it serves, and that's goes for different ethnicities, abilities. Just every newsroom should look like the community that they serve. And to me, that's just a goal, not just for Nine, but for all newsrooms across the country, right? I mean, people with disabilities are looked at as less than. And if I could be a voice to say that's not true, then so be it.
Got it. Well, let me ask you this: in terms of voices that are underrepresented, if you will, every newsroom's got them, since the dawn of the First Amendment, every newsroom has had them. The underrated workers in the American newsroom, who would you say they are? Like, this is your chance to shout out to some colleagues. Who are the most
Ooh.
underrated workers in the American newsroom, Kristen?
I think 100% show directors. I think when shit hits the fan, it's those directors that are pushing the keys, that are really hustling to get every shot up in just the right order. And, when you go to the Emmys, they don't often get shout outs. They get like a very little one, like photographers. Talent always gets like the big glory, right? But it's these directors that are back there really hustling that are helping. And I had Sandy Hernandez, and I knew she's Latina and she was a show director. And I really looked at her as a mentor, and she was just the best. And I just loved her. And I think she's definitely underrated. And I think that goes everywhere. Like show directors are so vital in the production of what everyone sees on TV, but they never get really any recognition.
Kristen, we can't wait to have you, Lori, and Sonia on
I
later
know.
this week. This is going to be such a great, and honestly, this as the third interview in our Nine News trilogy so far. Which again, we'll have our pen, or we'll have our, what we call it, a round table on
I know we
Thursday.
were just texting about it. We're so excited.
This is
I
going to
am,
be
I
awesome.
mean, if I could just shout out, I mean, I'll say that in the panel too, but I am so thankful for Lori and Sonia. Before I wouldn't speak out about this without them, and holding their hand through all of this has really made me just braver. And I think it just signifies how important Latinas and how strong we can be when we're together, right? Like what a force. I don't
Right.
think I would have had even a sliver of this impact if I went at it alone. But with Lori and Sonia with me, sharing their stories, like I feel very lucky, and I just feel so brave to be standing next to them.
Well, I mean, I think I speak for everybody here at Meet La Prensa when I say we hope that Latinas in the news business come together the way you three have, because honestly, you three
Yes,
holding hands like you have formed a chain, and that chain can be coast to coast, and the more that you can help each other, the less you need to rely on anybody else, and you should be a
100%.
force to reckon with. So, and I hope that this this isn't just like sort of like an explosion or like whatever, like an eruption, if you will, and more of a domino that got tipped. That's going to, you know, lead
Yes.
to a lot more of Latinas being able to
Mhm.
say, I don't know what to do. They now know they can come to you. They know that they can come to Lori. They know that they can come to Sonia. Nora Lopez is also like the NAHJ president. You know what I mean? Like she's been,
Mhm.
I think she's getting better and better at her job as the months go on. So, and I think that you
Yeah.
actually have inspired that organization, which in the past has sort of like, you know, swung between inaction and infighting. It's inspired them to take a little bit more focus and to focus on the problems that actually exist. So I'm really, I know for a fact I'm super inspired by all three of you, and I cannot wait to talk to you on
I know, I'm
Thursday.
so
So,
excited for our panel.
Kristen, thank you so much for
Yeah,
coming on
thank
Meet
you
La
so
Prensa.
much.
Viewer, you can find Kristen's Twitter handle right here in the description to this video. Please like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out. And if you know of any other Latinas or Latinos or journalists of color generally who are getting screwed over by their newsroom and they need a place, a platform to talk about it, that's what we're here to do. We love it. We love to have them on. So, viewer, thank you so much. That's a wrap.